Hope you're well. I'm here with my good buddy and freedom fighter extraordinaire, Robert Barnes. Robert, welcome to the show, my friend.
Glad to be here.
All right, so we have this FOIA request, and this has been going on, what, a year now or so, hasn't it?
Oh yeah, almost 2 years.
2 years?
Yeah,
We've been doing
because we
this?
started this, I think, late 2020 is when the whole process began, and we went through. The Fed gave every. Remember the Fed went in and changed the whole rules. They did that
Yeah,
because they
yeah,
did that almost 2 years to the day. Like as soon as we announced what we're going to do, they went in. I think in March of 2021, if I recall right, and went in and changed the rules to make it basically more bureaucratically cumbersome,
yeah.
with more administrative traps just to get the records, any records from the Federal Reserve. And, as we said at the time, maybe it's a coincidence. It's, after we announced big FOIA of the Fed, but, tell you how many coincidences have not exactly been coincidences over the last 2 years,
Yeah.
or last 3 years.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that timeline does sound right because I remember when we first started talking about it, we were grabbing dinner in Vegas, and I remember that walking through the casino, that was a time when they were making it mandatory for you to wear a mask. Uh, I think I forgot how we got around that, but anyway, I remember that. So yeah,
Oh,
that
we were
that
eating, so it was still, the Governor Sisolak, who's now gone, thankfully, from the state capital, with Sheriff Lombardo replacing him. It's probably going to be a mixed bag, but yeah, that was one of the exceptions. But still, then in Vegas was if you were at a restaurant, you didn't have to wear a mask.
yeah. So anyway, okay, so we've gotten it is obvious. We knew it was going to be a long process. We knew nothing was going to happen quickly, and we knew the Fed was going to try to push it out, and they were going to try to give us every single excuse to make it hard on us and make us spend more money and try to encourage us just to wave the white flag and kind of give up. But we haven't done that, and now, according to our direct message conversation the other day, you've received quite a bit of feedback from the Fed, and you've received a couple documents that we might be able to release to the general public to give them an idea of kind of the back and forth between you and the Federal Reserve's representatives.
Absolutely. So, we requested basically an audit of the Fed, to using the Freedom of Information Act to do it. Federal Reserve, unbeknownst to most people, is in fact subject to the Freedom of Information Act laws that's been established by multiple court cases after the global financial crisis, when no less than Bloomberg was the
Yeah.
one knocking on the door asking a few questions. Not the big questions, but at least some questions. And so consequently, we had a forensic accountant who's a former bank auditor make part of the request to get to what kind of information he would want as a bank auditor to audit the Fed. And then we had our sort of wish list. All these new entities you guys created in 2020. What exactly was your legal authority for that? And we decided, hey, let's go back through history. Back when you were discussing things around, I don't know, 1916, so on and so forth. What exactly were you guys conversing about, say, the scope of the income tax laws and the 16th Amendment? What were you saying about the scope of your own authority at the Federal Reserve? When can you just exceed your congressional mandate? When can you just ignore federal law limitations
Right.
and constitutional restrictions? So basically, it was the wish list, bucket list of everything everybody ever wanted from the Fed we requested. They went through every shenanigan, tool, trap you could possibly know. First, they said, oh, man, it's the pandemic. Golly gee, we would love to get back to you, but we just need a little more time. So they used every administrative hurdle, every delay tactic. I'm sick. I would love to come in kind of thing. And ultimately, their excuse was, you know what? We would love to get these records for you, but we don't know how to search our own records.
Yeah.
We
Yeah, the
don't have
dog ate
any.
my homework.
Yeah, exactly. We
The
would love to
dog
do
ate
it.
it. I don't know what happened. We've got this Federal Reserve dog, and damn it, the thing got hungry and ate all our records.
Exactly. We don't even know how the dictionary or the language works. We don't know what these things you call algorithms and search engines are. We don't know how to look up our own records. We don't have a library index key card. We don't have a means of, like they don't on a regular basis, type in certain subtopics for their meetings to know what's going on. So we would love to help, but we couldn't. So realizing the game they were playing, we came back and said, well, tell us your entire internal indexing protocol. How do you digitize records? Where and when do you digitize records? Who has access to those records? What search engines do you have available? What library key cards, if you will, in the digital space do you have? What email access do you have? Tell us how you store records so that we could have a permanent roadmap we could share with the world that says, here's how to request records from the Fed.
Yeah,
Here's
right.
how they index and organize their own records.
And that
They
was one of
go,
our main objectives, Robert. It wasn't necessarily just to win or do any of this stuff or to get rid of the Fed, but to kind of open up the door and make it easier for just normal everyday people to do these FOIA requests in the future to hold their feet to the fire legally.
Absolutely, to sort of democratize the FOIA process so everybody can be their own individual auditor of the Fed
Right.
using the Fed's own rules and protocols. And the goal was to design templates that we would share with the world. Here's how, where, and when to request records, and what language to use, what categories to use. But for that, we needed the Fed's own internal documentation on it. They initially denied it. We went through the appeal process. It looked like on the eve of, it looked like we weren't going to win the appeal. We were going to have to file suit. On the eve of filing suit, over the last several weeks or last several 2 weeks or so, all of a sudden the Fed came back and said, well, hold on, maybe we do have some stuff. But they sent it in a lot of technical language. So we are currently pouring through it to decipher it, decode it, and then we're going to share it with the world as here's how you do it. Now, we may do our own version of that. We may use their own lingo and language, take our original FOIA request, recast it, reframe it in their purported internal terminology.
Got it.
So that they finally have to disgorge documents they don't want the world to see. Here's what's clearly the case. You're definitely right on the right trail, because no way, I said early on, I said, if we're on the wrong trail, they'll produce whatever's there because there you won't be afraid of its public disclosure. They went through more shenanigans in this FOIA request, and I've been doing FOIA requests for the better part of a quarter century, more shenanigans than any agency has ever done in any FOIA case I've ever had.
Wow.
Which means we're right on the right track and on the right trail. There's a depository of treasury of information, a treasure trove of information sitting in the Fed's document vaults that might be more useful and applicable than the gold at Fort Knox.
Or you know what it reminds me of recently, Robert, are the Twitter files. All
precisely.
the information that came out that all of us assumed, but none of us had any definitive proof. And then when those Twitter files came out, now all of a sudden here's the smoking gun that proves that this has been happening behind the scenes. And I think this FOIA request from the Fed could be just as powerful.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the things we wanted was not only the whole history, not only how they created every special vehicle in 2020, and what their own internal communications and correspondence was about the legal authority of that. The issue of have they had personal internal discussions about the legality and appropriateness of, say, a wealth tax?
Right.
Because I've seen from other files and other locations that high-ranking bankers were discussing internally the permissible scope of the 16th Amendment. And that would just be interesting in their policies. But one of the key things we went after is something that's very current, which is we requested all their files concerning internal discussions about a central bank digital currency, about a Fed coin. And we now know that based on how they're trying to experiment with it, other countries are trying to experiment with it, that we were right on a hot topic. But that's one of the key pieces of information we want, because I'm sure there's tons of very interesting, very insightful internal discussions about what the true purpose of that would be, about its surveillance capacity, about its control capacity, about its non-monetary policy driven political decisions behind utilizing such a central bank digital currency.
Yeah, I mean, I started talking about that, I remember in 2019, and everyone was calling me a conspiracy theorist. But as time goes on, it's just they themselves talk about it more and more and more, to where now you hear them talk about it on CNBC.
Absolutely. And also, we requested all their internal conversations about a range of internal decisions made about issues related to, say, for example, inflation. Like, I would be very curious, how much have they had internal debates about the things that you've been discussing lately. To what degree have they had discussions about Jeff Snyder versus other discussion about how much does the Fed actually control inflation, or how much
or
of it
have any control over the monetary system? That would be a
exactly?
fascinating internal debate there if they had it.
They've almost guaranteed had internal discussions about it, internal reports. How much do we really control this? How much of this is perception versus reality? How much of this is all for show? How much of this can we distract from the problems that have now been created by the system of money being distributed by random foreign banks and other people actually controlling U.S. currency
Mm,
valuation for in the international markets? So there's a lot of interesting intel buried in there. And that would also have there been retrospectives. Did they do like your topic the other day? Did the Fed do a retrospective about how their 2007 prediction of a soft landing turned out not so prescient? Have they? You almost guarantee somebody's done a memo somewhere, somebody's done an email somewhere, because that's what the Twitter files show. One of my favorite principles is quoting Earl Long: "Never in writing and always in cash." When it comes to the government, these people can't help themselves. They always put it in
mm.
writing. So I would really like to see what's there, and to give everybody around the world a roadmap for how they individually, if they have a particular topic they're interested in, they can use the system we're creating, a template, so they can go at the Fed on a daily basis. Just flood them with interesting, useful, informative FOIAs so that we can Twitter file the Fed for the next decade.
Yeah, that's what I think is most important. So you're going through the most recent documents right now, determining from your professional standpoint as to whether it would be advisable or not, maybe to release some of these documents that you've gotten from the Fed to the general public via Twitter, or maybe on this YouTube channel, or maybe a combination of both. I can understand how that might not be a good strategy based on kind of where we are with the Fed, but maybe there's some documents that we could release that might not impact the probability of us achieving our goals. And that's kind of what you're going to mull over in the next few weeks. Is that correct?
Exactly. The goal is to make sure to make this information useful, that people aren't misled by it. If we just
Hmm.
disclose the documents without some guidepost to interpreting it, to
All right.
translating it, then it would be like a dump. It would be like if Musk had just done a dump of everything on the Twitter files without being able to organize it, understand its context. Then people might get lost. People might go down rabbit holes that lead them in the wrong place, the wrong path. People
Mm,
might file premature requests that don't get them anywhere, that aren't productive. So our goal is to make this as productive as possible for everybody. And
got
that
it.
requires filtering and interpreting this information and then presenting it to everybody in an accessible format so they can utilize it to empower them to go forward.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I want to remind everyone that you're going to be at Rebel Capitalist Live in Orlando, May 12th through the 14th. So maybe, I don't want to put any pressure on you, but maybe that'll give you enough time and you can incorporate that into your presentation at Rebel Capitalist Live. That would be
Oh,
super cool.
absolutely. That's definitely part of the objective.
Okay, so now moving on to more recent topics here. I wanted to get an idea as to what you're thinking about, what's on your radar. And I know you and your partner Viva get into the nitty-gritty of the freedom and liberty and the assault on our freedom and liberty from the central planners and the authoritarians. You guys get neck deep in this almost on a daily basis. So I want to hear what you guys think are the most important topics right now.
I would say it's twofold. I mean, one is the ongoing battle for medical freedom. So right now with Bobby Kennedy, I'm suing the the Food and Drug Administration and the Center for Disease Control, the FDA and the
Ah,
CDC. One case is pending before the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court will decide in mid-February whether they will take it. Another one's pending before the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And the question is, can you sue the government when the government is the source of these vaccine authorizations and mandates? And the government's excuse is, well, we just approved it. We didn't mandate it. Somebody else did. And when you sue the agency that mandated, they said, well, we didn't approve.
but they mandated it for their own employees, didn't they, Robert?
Oh, yeah, they did in some contexts. Yes, the Biden administration did. Those
Okay.
injunctions Those have mostly been stopped. But what basically happens is, but for the CDC and the FDA putting the vaccine on certain lists, whether it's the emergency use approved authorization list, or claiming it's licensed, but the licensed one is unavailable, or putting it on the kids list, the kids vaccine list. Those three decisions, in some cases, automatically make states have say that if the CDC approves, it's now mandated for your kid to go to school to take, and things like that. But if you sue the school district, or if you sue, say, the military or other people, or you sue your private employer, they say, we're just following what the FDA did or said. And what the FDA says is, we didn't mandate it, we just approved it. The mandators say, we didn't approve it, we just mandated it. So nobody can be sued. It's one of these games of nobody's able to be sued for causing the injury.
Yeah, it reminds me of that Spider-Man meme where they're both like pointing at each other.
Exactly. It's like a bunch of feds getting together. It's that kind of routine. So those cases are going forward. We have big vaccine mandate lawsuits going forward against Tyson Foods, against 3M, against employers. I got cases in about half dozen, actually have more than a dozen states now, about to file one, or did just file one against Madison Square Garden. So all these, we're going to keep fighting those cases for medical freedom all the way through the process, regardless of how much hurdles we face from the courts or from big corporate adversaries, because it's critical to establish as a precedent going forward that they can never do this again. On the other big issue really is that's kind of new is food freedom. So I represent Amos Miller, the Amish farmer, who at one point the government was trying to actually put in jail, impose a $300,000 plus contempt fine judgment against him, make it a monetary judgment where they could seize and shut down his farm and add his wife to the judgment. Now, and that was going to happen, by the way, on Christmas Eve.
And why? What were the charges against him? Like, what did he do wrong in their mind?
He's giving people food that people want and people like. That's the short answer, but it's non-USDA approved food. It's not big agriculture food. It's not big corporate. It's not big food company food. So what he does is he's Amish, comes from an Amish set of farmers that have been making food the same way for centuries. Anybody who studied the Amish know that despite certain risks and genetic histories, they are as a group healthier than their surrounding community. They live longer, their life expectancy is better, their anxiety levels are lower, their depression levels are lower, their need for medical care is lower, their cancer rates are lower, their heart disease rates are lower, their stroke rates are lower. And is it a coincidence that they often don't take vaccines and big pharma, and they rely upon natural food? So they don't put a bunch of preservatives on it. They don't put citric acid on their meats. They grow their food. They make their food. They make it in the healthiest, most sustainable ways. And what's happened over the last decade or so is a bunch of people have discovered that their bodies are deteriorating from all this big corporate food that has all these chemicals in it, has all this crap in it, so on and so forth, preservatives. So they've sought out who makes food the old-fashioned way, the way our ancestors ate it. And they found, it's the Amish. And so they reached out to Amos Miller, and they're buying what I call farm fresh milk, means, not ultra pasteurized milk. Anybody that's tasted it, I mean, when I was drinking it on a couple of shows, I was saying, go to AmosMillerOrganicFarm.com and you can get farm fresh milk today, just to screw with the feds. The people thought that I was on, I was doing lines of cocaine. They're like, man, but there must be some cocaine or something in that milk, because Barnes is like, but that's how good.
But it's similar. Correct me if I'm not a milk expert, but it's similar to the raw milk that I think you might be a little younger than I am, but I just turned 50. But back when I was young, you used to be able to get raw milk, right? I mean,
and that's what this is.
I remember that. Right?
This is raw milk. You remember how refreshing that is? I remember the first time I had it, I was like, holy, this is how milk is supposed to taste. Yeah. And that's how good his milk is. I mean, it's amazing.
And it's had a lot more cream. It was a lot more kind of creamy or whatnot. But I remember you still used to be able to buy that, just like you could buy 2% or skim or non-fat or what. That was like an option in the grocery store. So is it correct to assume that that's no longer an option?
It's very difficult. It depends on the state. The FDA technically still doesn't allow it. And then the USDA, who's been real aggressive in this context. They're the ones who are requiring you can only make meat the way we say you do.
What what
And
what
what's
what
happened,
is their argument against raw milk?
it's solely that it's kind of like the vaccine context where they claim credit for ultra pasteurized milk solving problems related to milk in the late 19th century. When if you dig in, the problem with milk in the late 19th century was the sudden urbanization of America and all the things that went with that sudden urbanization in terms of the conditions that the cows were in. Suddenly radically shifted from the farm to somebody's backyard. And the consequence of that, along with other sanitary issues with sudden urbanization, was the real related issue of milk. Joel Salatin does a great job of this. He wrote one of my favorite titled books of all time. He might be a fun guy for you to interview too. Called "Everything I Want to Do Is Illegal." He has a great whole Latin American story. His dad was a farmer in Venezuela. The government took over, stole all their land, had to come back to the United States. But he's one of the true fresh food people in this industry, having free range chickens. I mean, people don't realize the industrialization of our food supply, not a great idea. And then you
Yeah.
throw in Bill Gates buying up all that food, buying up all the land, the agricultural land in America, while he doesn't intend to actually use it for agricultural purposes because he wants to sell, his fake meat, his all that kind of stuff to people. I don't think he's going to be eating. It was like the people that went to Davos. I don't think they're eating any fake meat at those Swiss restaurants. Just like they are only pilots they wanted and the only drivers they wanted were the unvaccinated kind because they didn't want any sudden, going down.
Yeah.
The
I wonder if
same
they had
thing.
that stipulation for their prostitutes, Robert. What do
Yes,
you
yeah,
think?
exactly, unvaccinated only. Basically they went after him initially, Amos Miller, on the grounds that they said that some raw milk that got sold somewhere, somebody got sick on. Never turned out to be any evidence I've ever seen for that.
Hmm.
He's never had a customer ever complain about him. And the irony of this case is he's been stopped from selling his meat primarily. Now, not all meat. Certain meat is exempt from the U.S. laws. So you can still buy buffalo, you can still buy bison, you can still buy certain meat from him, but you couldn't buy any steaks, any cow meat. You couldn't buy any pork. You couldn't buy any chicken. You couldn't buy any turkey because the USDA says it has to be run the industrialized way, effectively.
Hmm.
And consequently, tons of people who not only want his food, I mean, this is the big irony. The U.S. Department of Agriculture was formed after Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle, just like the FDA was formed as a labeling agency. Like the FDA is not supposed to be a big, everybody's doctor, which is what they're pretending to be.
Yeah.
The same way, the USDA is not supposed to be everybody's farmer. Almost 95% of the people who work at the USDA have never farmed in their lives, and yet they're
Yeah.
telling farmers how to do things. They were supposed to be a labeling agency because what was happening in the early 1900s, you go to the local store, you buy a can of corn, open it up, and it's like kidney beans. It's like, well, what the heck? So they're supposed to say that what's inside that package, the label is accurate about. That's all they were supposed to be.
Hmm.
And instead, they've used that labeling authority, as you've talked about many times. You give the government just a little inch, and they're
Right.
going to go in and take about 10 miles. And that's what they did. They're now wanting to control what we're allowed to eat. Because here you have a situation where everybody knows what they're buying from Amos, and because that's exactly what they want. They want the meat that's not with citric acid, without these preservatives, without this industrial corporatized means of making food. They don't want, when they buy their chicken food, they want their chicken to be free range. They don't want it to be from chickens in industrial factories who are busy spending each day eating their own feces. That's not what they want, right? And so, but that's exactly what the USDA has shut down for years. And basically was threatening him with jail and contempt and bankruptcy if he didn't play ball. Now, the U.S. attorney involved in the case is a very reasonable person and has been trying to figure out a way to get a practical solution to the whole case. And he agreed. We ended Amos did not go to jail on Christmas Eve, didn't have to pay a huge fine, didn't get a monetary judgment. We were able to stop that from happening. So that was the first big win for Amos. But now the second big win is let's establish a basis where all of us as Americans get to eat the food we want. And then all that should matter is, just like in the medical freedom context, Everything should be based on informed consent.
Yeah. That's
Do I know?
exactly what Milton Friedman argued for in the 1970s.
And he was dead on right. It should be about what make sure the information is accurate.
Right.
That's a permissible role. But if I know what I'm getting, I get to choose, not some bureaucrat in Washington, D.C., what medicine goes into my body or what food I choose to eat.
Yeah.
And that's what it's really, this whole case is all about. And it's a case that'll impact everybody.
Yeah. Bravo, by the way, and tell the guy, good luck. We wish him all the best from the rebel capitalist community. You just reminded me, I don't know if I've ever told you this story, but here in Medellin, that's all I eat is buffalo or bison. I think it's kind of interchangeable, but I rarely eat beef unless I'm out like a restaurant or something like that. But every night,
you can probably get better, fresher food in Colombia than you can right now in America.
Oh, I guarantee you that, well, I shouldn't guarantee you because I don't know, but I can't imagine that they would have a law here that would prevent a farmer just selling his meat or his vegetables or his fruit just right out on the street with no, authority or no regulation or no license. I know that for a fact because I drive from here to the Lake Guadalupe, which is about an hour and a half drive. And once you get out off the highway for about 45 minutes, all you see are just stands on the side of the road because that's a big farm area of farmers just selling whatever it is they grow. And I can almost assure you that they're not growing things based on the oversight of the Colombian government or approving the watermelons or the papayas or whatever that you're buying from them right off the side of the little windy road that goes to the lake. So, yeah.
What's amazing is the old populist from Louisiana, Huey Long, predicted this all the way back in 1933, after the New Deal started. He said, what they're going to do is they're going to have ABC agency is going to tell you how many chickens you can grow, and then XYZ agency is going to tell you how fat your pigs can be. And that's exactly where we're now at, to the degree that it's not just limiting farmers, which we saw in the pandemic. This is a food supply problem. People don't know almost 90% of American food is controlled by a few corporations. That's not a good position to be in, as got exposed during the pandemic, as we now see with the price of eggs. For Valentine's, don't get your loved one a ring, get her a dozen eggs, because that's the more value. It's that kind of world we're living in. But that has a higher risk when we don't have a bunch of small farmers. So it's not just about you getting to control what goes into your own body. Allowing farmers to determine how they farm, but it's also about making sure our food supply isn't easily contaminated, isn't easily subject to bioweapons attack, doesn't have a sudden pandemic collapse where a food supply becomes a major problem with prices and accessibility. That's where Amos's case, at one point they were even telling some of the U.S. Department of Agriculture people, were even trying to tell Amos what his own family could eat and who could eat what. That's how nuts it got. A farmer telling a farmer what he can feed his own family. That's why this is such a broad impact issue on public policy grounds.
How do they control like farmers markets and stuff? Because isn't that what a farmers market is? Is just the farmers selling directly to the public without the oversight of the government, or do they still have to get things approved?
They usually have to. It depends on the state. They usually have to get things approved, and in certain circumstances, under the USDA's current interpretation, Amos can't even sell this at a farmers market. So, that's where they're going. When they get to the point, they're trying to, people didn't pay a lot of attention to it. It got a little sort of flashy news line and then disappeared. But it's not a coincidence the Biden administration was floating the idea of requiring everybody to register their own gardens in their own backyards. And I don't know if people remember that little headline came up and said, hey, make sure to tell us whether you have a garden. That's where it's going. They want complete control over the food supply. Because if you control the food, you control people's medicines, you effectively control people's bodies. And that historically is that if you don't own your own body, you can't control what goes into your own body. What do you control? What do you own?
Yeah, it reminds me of that. Josh, can you do me a favor while we're talking? Can you go ahead and pull up that quote from Henry Kissinger? The one that says that if you control the food, I think you control the population. If you control the energy or the oil, you control countries. And if you control the money, you control the world. Yep. It was, I think I'm getting that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Correct.
Because that was always
You remember that quote, Robert?
Oh, absolutely, because that was the old Putin debate
Yeah, here you
uh,
go. If you
from
control the food,
1996.
you control the nation, a nation. If you control the energy, you control a region. If you control the money, you control the world. Yeah.
Exactly. And that, in effect, is what their goal is to do. The central bank digital currency control the world. Now, of course, their failed efforts at going after Russia has probably put that back a little bit for half the world. But as people discover, maybe not so interested in being linked up to the Western financial system if they can take it away tomorrow. But they're still full throttle on the food part,
Yeah.
and that's where it's about. It's always been about control. And here again, if you look at like Bill Gates, is it really a coincidence? The three things the guy's been obsessed with is controlling medicine, controlling food, and and promoting digital identification and digital currencies, including in India and elsewhere. James Corbett did a great documentary on Bill Gates all the way back at the beginning of the pandemic, where he says, "Here's you can predict where their elites are going to go, where the Davos types are going to go by just looking at Bill Gates's history. Where has he spent his money? Where has he been paying attention?" And those have been his three obsessions. And this is a guy, you've been mentioning it. He idolizes Rockefeller. Rockefeller was obsessed with population control, talked about using vaccines to do population control back in the 60s. The Rockefellers, of course, were big in eugenics, helped put in a lot of the eugenics places in Nazi Germany. That's where Hitler got all of his ideas from. And it goes all the way back to tied into the Malthusian obsession with energy, with resource control to get population control, to get ultimate control. And that's why the Amos Miller case looks like just a little Amish farmer just wants to make food the way he's been making it for centuries that everybody loves. His little case ends up having global consequences for the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Very well said. And I'd also like to point out the fact that, number one, I've been calling them the Malthusian cult on this channel and on Twitter. I think that's a perfect way to describe them. And also, I'd like to point out the fact that, assuming Gates goes to Davos every year, which I think he does, so does Kissinger.
Oh,
So
yes.
what are the probabilities that Gates has had dinner multiple times and rubbed elbows and had kind of brainstorming sessions with Kissinger and Klaus and all these people that back in the day, when he was kind of a tech geek or whatever, could maybe influence him to think about these Malthusian ideas in a positive light?
Just go back 2009, where he organized a meeting with, I believe it was George Soros, Bloomberg, one of the Rockefellers, Oprah Winfrey, I think
I
Ted
remember
Turner.
that. I did a story on that. Yep.
Remember they showed him as the media tried to portray them as superheroes. They even
Yeah.
put like Superman things and Batman, like, oh, they Bill Gates, superhero to the rescue, is going to control the world. I mean, the guy's like right out of a Bond villain movie. Increasingly, I think all these things are like Bond villain movies were basically predictions of our future, the way things have turned out.
Yeah, 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 like The Simpsons
Yeah.
almost. All right, so I want to get your take on two things I just remember that I wrote down. Number one, the most recent Pelosi video, and then number two, this Veritas video with the kid from Pfizer, and just the one where he gets caught on record, and the one where he's just absolutely freaking out.
Well, first on the Pfizer one, I represent Brooke Jackson, the big whistleblower, bringing a claim against on behalf of the entire people of the United States against Pfizer for
Okay.
its fraud. Now, what's amazing is Pfizer has been screaming and begging and yelling at the judge, please, 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 whatever you do, don't let Barnes have any discovery in the case. Barnes is a dangerous man. Barnes is a bad guy. Barnes goes out there saying all these things. Pfizer follows me around in clips every little time I appear somewhere. And they usually take the clip out of context and all that, saying, see, judge, this is a troublemaker, judge. This is a troublemaker. And the judge, so far has gone along with Pfizer's request, not allowed us any discovery. He even kind of complained to me last time. He goes, I see that Mr. Barnes referred to my discovery decision as a wuss decision. And I was like, yeah, kind of was a wuss decision. God bless you, Judge. Think you're a great guy. But that was kind of a wuss decision. But now we see why Pfizer doesn't want any discovery and why they're like one of their obsessions was, Judge, if you give Barnes any discovery, he'll probably disclose it to the world. Well, what are they so scared of if there's not anything to hide? Well, now
Right.
we know because all Project Veritas has got to do is catfish one of these corporate executives. And, some people for a date bring you roses, other people confess their crimes. It's a different way these days. And this guy would just, yeah, let me tell you what we do. We do a little variant mutation. We do, because there's no better way to build demand for your new vaccine by making sure that the virus has mutated in a way that will make
Right.
create the need for that vaccine.
What
It's
did he
like
call it? Something evolution, controlled evolution, or
directed evolution.
directed
It's not,
evolution, right.
it's not gain of function. Let's not
Oh,
call it
no,
that.
heavens
Let's just
no.
call it directed evolution. The terminology is great, and the fact that it's another movie makes reality. I mean, what was the plot for V for Vendetta? I mean, we were talking about this all the way back at the beginning of the
Yeah.
pandemic. You create a virus that you already have the drug for. You use it to get rich and powerful. And this is Pfizer is. I always tell people if you want to talk about drug dealers, criminal drug dealers, compared to Pfizer, El Chapo is your local street corner thug.
Yeah, right.
Nobody has operated on a criminal scale the size of Pfizer. This is a company that is one of the most criminally punished and fined drug companies in the world, not for killing 10,000, not for killing 100,000, not for killing or disabling single million, but tens of millions. It's Pfizer that was connected to the book John Le Carre wrote, The Constant Gardener, about impermissible medical experimentation in Africa. I mean, that's who this company is. And so the fact they've been screaming and doing everything possible to keep us from getting discovery in the Brooke Jackson case against them told me, they are sitting on all kinds of scandals. And as soon as this video comes out, they don't refute the video. They don't refute the individual in it. They don't disclaim anything connected to it. Instead, they put out on Friday night, they put out a press release that you have to dig through it. Some lawyer wrote that, not even a press person, to dig through it to say, well, now and then we may actually mutate viruses for experimental purposes, but let's not call it gain of function. It's like it was a basically admission. Once again, James O'Keefe and Project Veritas nailed it, which is why they're trying to keep YouTube promoting it, trying to keep the media. Media doesn't want to talk about it because it's one of the most explosive documentary videos. And now I know why they are so desperate to not allow Brooke Jackson a sneak peek at their real documents and discovery in her huge whistleblower case pending in federal court.
Yeah. Did you hear Brett Weinstein's take on that?
Yes. And he has been really great on this all the way through for years.
Yeah. I listened to his podcast that he did with his wife over the weekend, and his take was one that I hadn't heard before. I didn't really think about it because I didn't really watch too much of those videos. I was doing other things. But his take, just a summary, is that this kid could have been hired not due to merit, but just due to the fact that he's African American and Pfizer is trying to go down this woke path. And he could have been just incredibly incompetent because what he was disclosing to the person with the undercover camera might have been an admission, but if it was an admission, it was nonsense. Like scientifically, it didn't really add up. So either he was just spitballing it to, I don't know how that would impress a date, but impress a date, or he was admitting something, trying to look cool, but he's so damn incompetent that what he was admitting was nonsense. And I think, I don't want to put words in Brett's mouth, but I think that was kind of his base case, because when James O'Keefe confronted him the next day or whenever it was, and he just completely loses his mind. When he's on the phone, he immediately says that he's surrounded by like 5 white guys or something. So Brett was like, okay, obviously he's on this kind of woke power trip to where he's not afraid to use that to try to gain power over someone. So why wouldn't he be willing to use that to get a job? And obviously Pfizer, trying to go down this, corporate woke path to wave the flag and virtue signal, they're more interested in hiring people right now due to certain boxes that they tick that make them look good from a progressive standpoint, as opposed to merit. And I thought that was an interesting take on it.
Yeah, I think 2 things. One, I think, the fact that he appears to be a gay woke black guy makes him, gives him 3 bonus points for getting in to corporate employment. And I think the second thing is what he really did is, but he's a very young doctor, so I don't think he fully understood, as Brett points out, what the real science is.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think he stumbled into it because he was just putting, and I think his core conclusion, even though his scientific means of getting there wasn't quite, he didn't fully understand. His conclusion was very apt. In other words, he realized, okay, as drug companies, how do we build desire for a product? We make sure there's a disease that will promote that product, and that's always been a risk. In medicine's unique that way. It's a place where the free market system can get distorted because you have an incentive to create disease in order to create profit. And I think that's what he understood. And he saw some terminology. They gave him such a high-ranking position. He saw enough of the documents and information that he grabbed bits and pieces. And while he put the pieces of the puzzle together, and probably in the wrong scientific order, they were actual pieces of the puzzle, and they do lead to the practical conclusion that he talks about, which is Pfizer's profits depend on more disease rather than less.
Yeah, yeah. So then now let's move on to the Paul Pelosi deal, where I didn't watch this either because I'm like, I don't need the drama. But I guess the first question is like, who's opening the door? And but anyway, you had a fantastic take on this whole situation when it first came out. Like, why aren't there any security guards? Like, how did this guy like just open the back door? Why was it open? But what's your take on this most recent revelation?
So I don't know about you, George, but when someone's kidnapping me, I always get a drink and just sort of chill and open the door with a drink. Don't you? Isn't that natural? So everything about this still screams something about this story does not add up. So you have somebody that's as wealthy as Pelosi, that's as politically targeted as that house has been for prior protests, doesn't have any security present. And usually what that means, I always say that a red flag of a false flag are unusual security lapses of some type. And here, my guess, usually what happens, it's the same reason that Paul Pelosi may not have had any security present at his house that night, such that some random schmuck could walk in the side door. It's probably the same reason Bill Clinton told the Secret Service they could stay home when he hopped on the Lolita Express to go down to Epstein Island.
Right.
You don't want security around when you're up to things you don't want them to see or witness. So I still think that's probably part of the backstory that they're trying to hide and suppress. But otherwise, how he opened the door is still unexplained. Why he has a drink in his hand makes absolutely no sense at all. Why he's sitting there just kind of casually holding a hammer with the guy while talking to the police is totally wacko. I mean, if you had somebody that was trying to hurt you, wouldn't you, as soon as that door opens, run to get out the door rather than just, hey, how are you doing? What are you going to do with that hammer? Hold on a second. Let me take a drink. So nothing about this makes any sense at all. There's definitely something there that they're hiding. I don't know what it is, but the more we hear and see about this case, the weirder it gets.
Do you think it just ends here, or do you think something else surfaces?
I think something else will surface unless they need controlled opposition, what I call captured counsel. One of the keys in all these kind of cases is to make sure the lawyer for the defendant is playing ball. Some believe Tim McVeigh's lawyer kind of played ball with the government. A lot of discovery was never disclosed in that case about Oklahoma City. James Earl Ray's lawyer was kind of captured counsel, made sure things about the Kenneth King assassination never really came out. So there's a history of those kind of lawyers being involved in these kind of cases where they're really more loyal to the system than they are exposing the system. There's some argument that happened in the Unabomber case where Ted Kaczynski's lawyer could have exposed a whole bunch, including Ted Kaczynski being an MK Ultra victim from Harvard. None of that ever got fully outed or exposed. Also, big Fourth Amendment issues about how they even searched his house in the first place out in the woods based on very questionable evidentiary substantiation. So the only way ever the whole truth comes out is if he has a conscientious lawyer that wants to tell the whole truth and dig into all the black holes they want to hide. My guess is otherwise, normally the way these cases end is he cuts a plea deal. His lawyer never presents his full defense, never does full discovery, or he gets Epsteined while he's in jail.
You're talking
If
about the dude that clubbed Pelosi.
Yeah, the guy that. So that's who's the most likely person to be able to expose the whole truth? Him, and particularly his lawyer, digging.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yep. So I've had this in other cases where someone will hire me, and I'll know where to dig, and usually then they give my client a very sweet deal so that I'll stop digging. So I had a case where very prominent tax lawyer who had been indicted on a bunch of charges. He was up against a billionaire. And the reality was the billionaire was involved in corruption in Brazil with Lula, by the way, and but deeply involved with President Clinton. And I kept telling all the prosecutors, as soon as I get a hearing on anything, bail, pretrial motion to dismiss, whatever, first person I'm subpoenaing was then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. And the second person is William Jefferson Clinton. And as soon as I got close to that and was doing other discovery, all of a sudden they give my client a sweetheart deal. Let him out of jail, say, we don't need to go much further on this. This is all good. So that's how, see how aggressive the discovery is. See how, if he gets a sweetheart deal, then he had a good lawyer that did a good job. If he gets a weird deal, or he ends up with a weak defense, or he ends up, getting Epstein, then something wasn't fully on the up and up in this case.
I wonder if that's why he pled non-guilty.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's got to be a huge backstory here.
You see because I know that he basically admitted everything to the police, and then he comes out and pleads non-guilty or not guilty. But if you knew that the prosecution can only take it so far, and the defense knows that if they press certain buttons, they're going to wave the white flag like immediately, just like you were saying. Like, why not just plead not guilty? Because this guy's most likely going to get off the hook because he has information that the other side does not want out in the open. Do you think?
And look at what happened around the same time frame. All of a sudden, Nancy Pelosi is no longer interested in being the Democratic Party leader.
I was going to ask you. That was my next question. Do you think this is a factor in her wanting to retire?
It could easily be. And then you had the Pelosi's making unusual stock trades. Because for people who don't know, the greatest hedge fund in the world the last 40 years has been the Pelosi stock trades. Nobody's as successful as the Pelosi's are, magically.
Right.
But they started dumping a bunch of stocks not long after this time frame too. Like they were trying to liquidate all their positions. Yeah. So I suspect something's there that could be very bad and very embarrassing. And they're trying to run out the clock until the point nobody cares anymore because they're no longer in positions of power and they have all their cash in the bank.
Yeah, right. So let's just take a back seat, let this get out of the news cycle, sweep it under the rug, and just try to move on.
Yep. Nothing to see here. Nothing like the Naked Gun scene with the fire going on behind it. Nothing to see here.
All right, buddy. Awesome conversation as always. Tell everyone about what you do on Locals and what you do with Viva and all the stuff all the content that you create that people can follow.
Absolutely. So if people want that farm fresh milk or any other bunch of great foods that he is still allowed to sell, you can go to AmosMillerOrganicFarm.com. Cool. And if you want any of the content that we create or produce, Viva and I, including hush hush videos on conspiratorial alternative narratives over history, you can get all of that at vivabarneslaw.locals.com.
Awesome, buddy. All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your day. I'll look forward to seeing you next in Jekyll Island.
That's right.
We're going to see you here at the end of February in Jekyll Island. And then for everyone else who is thinking about coming to Rebel Capitalist Live, make sure you get your tickets ASAP. We're going to have the amazing Robert Barnes there, Lynn Alden, Mike Maloney, Chris McIntosh. We just had Simon Black with Sovereign Man. He just gave us the green light. He's going to be there. And I was just talking to someone, I might be able to spill the beans right now, Robert. I think I probably can. I got a text from my good buddy Peter Schiff yesterday, and there's we'll call it a very, very, very good chance, 95% chance that he's going to be at Rebel Capitalist Live as well, speaking there with you. So super excited, guys. If you haven't got your tickets, go to rebelcapitalistlive.com right now and grab them. and we'll see you on the next video.